Okay, so on today's episode, we're going to be talking about cam position sensors for various versions of the NA and NB Miata. So first, we're just going to go through and identify each one. So what we've got here, this is the cam position sensor for a 1.6 NA. And then here we have the 1.8 NA cam position sensor. And the main difference that you can see is the back cover has sort of a different shape to it. One is domed. The 1.8 has kind of a dome to it, and the other one is flat. And the other difference is the way the wire harness connects. So if we put both of these like that, we've got the mounting position in the same place. You can see there's a slight different angle to the way that the electrical connector plugs in. Other than that, they are virtually identical. So the back is really just a sort of aesthetic thing, but you can see that angle on the connectors there is slightly different. However, they are completely interchangeable between the 1.6 and 1.8 NA Miatas. They both plug in to the back of the cylinder head. On one, it goes on the intake cam. One of them, it goes on the exhaust cam. And that's why there's a slight difference in the angle for the connectors. However, like I said, they're completely interchangeable. Once you get them mounted up, the stock wiring harness will reach either one, and they can be adjusted just the same. So they mount the exact same way. You can see, of course, they have a slot in here because this is kind of an old school style, so it actually plugs into this end here, will actually plug into the camshaft itself, and it picks up the engine rotation that way, and then it encodes it inside here. So here we have the NB sensor, much smaller, and this plugs into the valve cover. On the NB1, this will plug into the front of the valve cover, and it picks up the timing based on little nubs that are on the actual cam sprocket that carries the timing belt. And then on the NB2, it mounts kind of from the top in the back, and it picks up those little nubs on the actual camshaft itself that will go past it. So apart from the size and the way that they attach to the engine, the real main difference between the NA and the NB style sensors is on the NA, this is actually a 4-pin connection in here. And what's happening inside here is there's actually two separate sensors operating that give both the crankshaft position and then also the camshaft position. So it's providing two separate signals to the engine through the one sensor. Now on the NB, the two sensors are separate. So you'll have your camshaft position, and then you have the crankshaft position sensor, which this mounts down low on the front of the engine, and it picks up some little nubs that are on the actual crankshaft pulley. It's actually a plate that mounts behind it. One of the most common problems that we see on these is there's actually an O-ring that sits in this groove here. And that O-ring, over the years and the heat, basically just gets hard and brittle, and it'll either just stop sealing, or sometimes it'll even crack if it gets old and brittle enough, and then you'll get a leak basically out of the bottom of this. It comes out and goes down the back of the cylinder head. So that's a very common thing. It's not too difficult to do in the car. You take out the mounting bolt here, and then this will actually just slide out, and from there you can replace the O-ring and slide it back. Now on these, they do have a slotted hole, which allows you to adjust the timing. So kind of like an old distributor-based car, you would use the timing light and then make adjustments to this to set your ignition timing. So it's got a relatively small window. The car will pretty much run anywhere within the adjustment range. But in order for it to run optimally and to run safely, you'll want to use a timing light to check that and adjust it. So what we often do is if we're just replacing the O-ring, what you can do to save yourself some trouble is you can actually just make a mark on the body of it, a paint mark. So that way when you take it off and put it back in, if you line up the paint mark, you should be within about a degree of where you were. So you'll still want to always check it with a timing light, but that will save you a lot of time. And if you don't have a timing light, generally I would consider that it would still be safe if you line up your paint mark exactly. Now, the NB sensors are a little bit more likely to fail. The most common failure that we see with these is people will get a misfire somewhere around, it's almost always around like 4,000 RPM. And when you get that, the actual tachometer will start really dropping and jumping around. It's the motion of the tachometer will look sort of violent. And to me, that's usually an indication that it's the cam position sensor. And luckily, these are relatively inexpensive and they take about 10 seconds to replace. There's just the one bolt, you slide them out and put it back in. There's no adjustment to the timing or anything like that on the NBs. So one of the common questions that comes up with these is there's a lot of cases where maybe you're putting an NB engine into your NA, or even vice versa, although that sort of feels a little bit backwards. But in either case, all of the NA and NB engines do have the provision to mount the old style cam sensor in the back of it. The NBs still have, there's like kind of a giant hole in the back of the head. The NBs just have a little cap that's in there. And so you can remove that cap and then plug this in, and it has the mounting hole and everything to adjust it, and it'll work just the same way. Actually, my own personal car right now has an NB engine, but it's running all the electronics from the NA, and this is a key part of that. And then you can just leave the NB sensors off when you do that conversion, so there won't be anything for them to plug into. Now, you can go the other way. It's a little bit more complicated, but functionally, these sensors all work the same way. And as we talked about, this sensor has 2 circuits in it. It's actually sensing 2 different positions at the same time. And so it's got the 4 pins. Now, these 4 pins, I'm not going to go into the details of that in this video, but those 4 pins, it's basically a power, a ground, and then 2 sensor outputs. Now, each of these are a 3-pin. And what you can do is you can get the 2 signals that you need and run them into this connector on the NA wire harness. And the result is each of these sensors, the 3 pins, is a power, a ground, and then 1 signal. So you can splice into this harness and take the power and ground, send that to each one, because you're going to have a total of 6 wires, basically. So your power and ground will each get doubled to go into these. So then you'll have 4 of your 6 pins covered, and then the 2 signal wires, 1 will go to each. And so the result is you'll have the 2 sensors running, and your stock NA computer and wiring harness and all of that would basically just be seeing the same thing that it would be seeing here. Most of the time, it's just much simpler to use this sensor because these 2, since they're working together, you can have synchronization issues. It can get kind of complicated when you're doing it that way, on top of the fact that you've got to do all that wiring. And if you get any of the wires reversed, of course, none of it's going to work. So, like I said, for my own car, I just plugged one of these into the back of the NB engine, and it runs perfect. So I didn't have to do any changes to the wiring harness or any of that. All right, so there you have it. There's the differences between the 1.6, the 1.8 NAs, and then the NB cam position sensors. And again, NB1 and NB2 use the exact same sensors, even though they're mounted in slightly different locations. So there's the quick overview, and that's basically all I wanted to cover on these today. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments. I'll try to get back to you on that. And thanks for watching.